come from. And I'm going to give you some choice. Oops. I'm going to give some choices. Let's see here. Do you think they come from Germany, Scandinavia, Normandy, Roman Empire, or Greece? So anybody want to... All right, well, the answer is English words come from all of that. They arrived at different times in English, and they make up the language that we speak. And so whenever you're tempted to say English is weird, English is stupid, I get it. But really what you're saying is, man, the backstory of English is so complex. It's really affecting my ability to understand spelling and reading. And if you join on YouTube, you can actually see my screen here that I'm sharing. And so this is the layer cake of history. And today I'm going to talk about the birth of English and how it came to be. So when we talk about English, we have to remember that English comes from England. It didn't come out of somebody's head. It didn't drop out of the sky. It didn't come from the dictionary. It came from the area of the world known as England, the little island there, north of Spain and France. And I want to be very clear, when we are talking about England, we are not talking about Wales. We are not talking about Northern Ireland. We're not talking about Scotland. We're talking about that area called England. So that is where the English language that we speak originated. So, before England became England, oops, let me move myself here. Let me make myself smaller. There we go. So before England became England, you might have heard of the Celtic tribes, not the Boston Celtics, but the Celts. They didn't have soft C back then. So if you're talking about the ancient tribes, it's Celts. And they lived in the area we now know as England, but back then it was called Britain or Britannia. And I read somewhere, and I believe this is right, correct me if I'm wrong, but Britannia in Greek, Britannia meant the painted people, because I guess the Celts painted themselves blue. And so the Celts were living there. The Roman Empire came in for a hot minute in Britain and lived alongside the Celts. And then in the 400 ADs, the Roman Empire pulled out, and the Celts were left in kind of a power vacuum situation. And that is when the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons came in. So the Anglo-Saxons were Germanic tribes from Denmark, northern Germany area. And it's the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, just to be clear. But the Jutes were only in the southeastern part of England, and they weren't the big contributors here. But the Anglo-Saxons came in and they settled in what is England or Britain at the time. They pushed the Celts north into what is Scotland and west into what is Wales. And they settled in what we now know as England. Now, Angleland, if you say Angleland 5 times fast, Angleland, England, 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 it kind of sounds like England. And so that's where we get the name England from, land of the Angles, Angleland, England. And that's how it got its name. And that's where we get the language English. So that is the birth. So that happened in 450 AD. So if you needed a birthday for English, it would be 450 AD. Happy birthday to English, Anglo-Saxon. Thank you for liking. I really appreciate it. Keep liking. I'm new to this, and YouTube, I'm sorry, but I also have it streaming on TikTok. This is so exciting. All right, so 450 AD, English is born, the Anglo-Saxon layer of our language. Now, let me give you some background to these people. Okay, 450 AD. The Anglo-Saxons were Germanic tribes. They were fighters. They were farmers. Their words reflect that lifestyle. There were not books. We're not talking about literate individuals who were checking out books at a library and reading and writing. That was not even a thing. And if they did write, they wrote in runes, R-U-N-E-S, English runes. And somebody told me once that the Germanic runes, if you've read The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, that's what Tolkien used, I guess, is the language. So they wrote their runes in wood and stuff. So, but again, that they weren't writing books. That wasn't a thing. So the big thing about understanding that is their words reflect their lifestyle. So their words are common words, everyday words that would reflect the world around them. So let me move my slides here. That way. Okay, so when we talk about Old English, English is now the language spoken in England, England, and it is Germanic in origin. I also need to make mention that in 497, St. Augustine, I think the legend is he was somewhere and saw these slave kids with blonde hair. Oh, where are they from? They look like angels. And they were Anglo-Saxon slaves. And they were pagan. And he's like, oh, this England, they can't be pagan. They need Christianity. So in 597 AD, St. Augustine sent monks over to England, to set up monasteries and Christianize these pagans. And so I need to bring that up because the church spoke Latin. And so Latin did come in, but we're not talking it. It was just in the monk area. But that did come in 597, so you kind of have some Latin words that have to do with the church. Then the other thing to note is the Anglo-Saxons were not like one unified group. They were about 7 kingdoms, and they were constantly fighting with each other. And if you want to actually see what that looked like, on Netflix, there's a show called The Last Kingdom, which is about that time in history, which is really fascinating just to see what it looked like, possibly. The other thing I want to mention with the Anglo-Saxons is in 878, they had a king named Alfred the Great. And Alfred the Great was very intellectual, and he promoted writing in English. Okay, the only writing at the time, like for the church, was in Latin, but he wanted to actually begin writing things down in English so people in England could read it. And back then, remember, we didn't have libraries and stuff. When you wrote, Latin was the main writing language of the church. And so he's like, well, we can either write in runes or Latin. And so he adopted the Latin alphabet for writing in English rather than using the runes. So that was a big deal. And I also want to mention Alfred the Great because without Alfred the Great, we might all be speaking Old Norse right now rather than English, because the Vikings were constant pests during this time, and they were constantly raiding and stealing and killing England to the point England almost became totally controlled by the Vikings. But Alfred the Great saved England. So that's a little bit about the Anglo-Saxons. If you want to know more about it, I would recommend, Googling it, but that's the gist. But I do need to make mention of the Viking invasions because these forever changed England, and they did add to our language. So when we talk about that basic bottom layer of our language, the Old English layer, yes, it's the Anglo-Saxon, but also there's some Viking thrown in there. And so the big Viking invasion of 793 happened in northern England, and they decimated a monastery. It was horrible, and burnt it, stole treasures, looted. Just all the things you think about Vikings are pretty much true. They were They enjoyed the raiding. And so they started coming hot and heavy on the scene in the late 700s, and they were constantly invading. They started with monasteries. They almost took over all of England. King Alfred was able to stop them at London. It was kind of a miracle in the way that happened, that he was able to stop them, but he did. And then that, in the 870 time, started what was called the Danelaw. And Danish, Viking, Scandinavian, Dane, Old Norse. And so the Danelaw of 870 basically, okay, all drama is mine, but I just see it as Alfred saying, all right, I know y'all want to live here. Just take that part. You all get that northern part, like the northeastern part, and I'll take the southwestern part. Just let's have this line, and you do you. England will do England down here. So that was called the Danelaw, and it was this line where it was separated, and it was land for Vikings to live and follow Viking laws. And what happens when you are next door to somebody who speaks another language? You adopt some of the words. So we did have some words coming in during that time. Another interesting fact about the Vikings is, did you know England had a Viking king? In 1016, King Knut the Great became the king of England and Denmark and Norway. So he was like the tri-country king. And so the Vikings were a big player during this time. So I think it's kind of not fair when we say, oh, Anglo-Saxons, those were the Germanic tribes. That's Old English. Yeah, but there was a lot of Viking going on at the time as well. So that is a little bit about that time period. So the one thing I want to tell you about Vikings, if you were like me, you think that Vikings had horns on their heads. They did not have horns on their heads. So if you could see my slides right now, you would see a Viking with the horns on the head, and the horns are X'd out. All right, so this leads me back to English language. What does this have to do with English? Well, when you understand the birth of English with the Anglo-Saxons, how the monks started coming over, and that's how Alfred the Great started, adopting the Roman alphabet, because that's what the monks were using, and you understand how the Vikings were invading, well, then you start understanding, okay, this is the birth of our language. And for phonics and reading and morphology, this explains so much. So these are our common, ordinary, everyday words. Mom, dog, house, apple, yellow, early, right. All the colors and numbers come from the Anglo-Saxon layer. This is our K2 through 2 phonics. These are the basic words we are first learning and we use all the time, are straight from the Anglo-Saxon layer of our language. These are our high frequency words, our articles, the, a, and an, our conjunctions, and, but, if, for, helping verbs, is, was, will, can, should, prepositions, in, on, at, to, by, with, for, Anglo-Saxon layer. Silent letters that give us grief, Anglo-Saxon. So if I know something with a K, well, they used to say it, know. If a gnat is flying around my ear, well, they used to say that G, the gnat. If I turn on the light, that GH in there used to be pronounced light. And the WR in right, like I'm going to write my name, right, it used to be pronounced. So those silent letters that make people go, oh, English is so stupid. Well, they were once pronounced just like that. Weird spellings that were like, why is it spelled this way? Like B-E-E-N, Ben, or could, C-O-U-L-D, or I, E-Y-E, or said, S-A-I-D. Those weird spellings, Anglo-Saxon layer. This is the most fascinating to me. Compound words. So remember, the Anglo-Saxons were common, ordinary, everyday folk. They were not checking books out of a library. They didn't even think about books or writing. So when they looked at the world around them, they would just take their common, simple words, which are 1 or 2 syllables, and put them together. So if they had a room with their bed in it, they would call it a bedroom. That's right. If they saw a worm crawling around in the earth, they would call it an earthworm. So that's where we get compound words, straight from the Anglo-Saxon layer. And then so that's phonics, words, the basic words we're learning. But then when you get to morphology, that's when you start studying meaningful parts. That's when you start talking about, oh, these are our base words that we're going to add prefixes and suffixes to. So if I have the Anglo-Saxon word cat, and I want to say more than one, I say cats, and I add an S. Or if I want to say run, and I want to put ing at the end, running. Good job, Star Martin. Earthworm, yay. Okay, you're back on the compound word, but yes. All right, so this can be very helpful for you understanding English. And it doesn't matter if you're a teacher or not. Everybody needs to understand this, because we all read, we all spell, we all talk, and we want to understand these words. Also, for the Viking shout out, a lot of other common everyday words that we use from the Vikings would be egg, sky, window, they, get, both, wrong. Again, those common, everyday, simple words. And we do have a handful of Viking words because they were living in England. So anybody who's in the chat, whether you're on YouTube or TikTok, what percent of words in the English language do you think come from the Anglo-Saxon layer, the basic first layer of our language? Any guesses? What percent of words are from the Anglo-Saxon layer? It's okay. I wouldn't have known either. You're right, Jimmy. I would think 92. I mean, I would think that because they're so common. All right, get ready to be amazed. The percentage of words that come from our Anglo-Saxon layer is about 20 to 30%. A very low percentage come from that layer of our language. But here's the kicker. We use about 70 to 80% of those words in everyday speech because they're the common words that we use. So while it's a pretty low number in English, we're using them all the time. And again, I had a teacher ask me, Laura, when would you start talking about the cake and the layers of English to students? And I mean, I would say ASAP, as soon as possible. You don't have to go in depth with it, but there's no reason little kids can't be told, hey, did you know English comes from England? And the first people who started teaching it were like fighters and farmers, and they just, said the words around them, like window or sky or wall or chair. Kids can understand that. I mean, it's so interesting, and because we don't want anybody, but especially young children learning our language, to think English is stupid and that it just fell out of the sky. And one interesting thing to check kids' understanding, or anybody's understanding, is ask, where do words come from? I was able to present to a school last year on this, and when I asked, where do words come from? A man, the dictionary, from, the Bible, from God. I mean, just really interesting, because nobody's ever really thought about it before. And for English's sake, they were born in England. Now, I could get into a whole bunch of where did language begin, and that's Proto-Indo-European, but that's not today's topic. But anyway, so yes, young learners, you can totally talk about that. I mean, in a fun, exciting way, and, make them aware of these words. Let's see, let's see on my slides here. Oh, the last thing I want to say about this today is the reason understanding the history, the layers of our language is, first of all, it's interesting, but when you look in dictionaries, it tells you right where the word comes from. So on my slide here that I'm showing on YouTube, I have the example, the word evil, E-V-I-L here. And I have circled, it says O-E, which means Old English. And so once you understand, Old English was born in 450 AD, well then when you look at the dictionary, you can be like, okay, this is an old word. And even it gives the spelling here for Old English for evil, it was Y-F-E-L. Iful. Iful. And again, to us, that looks weird, like yuffle. But there's a lot of history in those letters, like Y, often represented a vowel sound. F and V are very similar. So if you're with me, make the V sound, which is your teeth on your lips going like evil. But then in Old English, they said iful with the F sound and spelled it with an F. And so F, teeth on the lips. So and V are very similar. All that's different is if your throat's turned on or not versus V. So, and even those odd spellings begin to make sense. So somebody put in the chat about Shakespeare. I'm not to Shakespeare yet. And so I'm just back at 450 AD. But yes, Shakespeare had a huge influence on our language. And that gets more into the cusp of leaving Middle English into Modern English. But right now I'm just in Old English. So Jimmy asked, would Eiffel Tower be Evil Tower? Oh, okay. Okay, I don't know how to do TikTok very well. Let me see if I can write in here. Can I write in here? Okay. Jimmy, I don't know. I'd have to look it up. But the way Old English spelled evil, if you want to type it in the chat as I say it, Y, letter Y, F-E-L. And that was Old English. So I don't think they're connected because it didn't come from French. But now I want to look that up. So let me look that up because I'm always curious about where things come from. What is the etymology of the word Eiffel as in Eiffel Tower? It just comes from his name. It's the name of the creator. A French civil engineer and entrepreneur, Gustave Eiffel. So it's a name. Yeah, you're right. It's the inventor. You're right. Mm-hmm. Yep. So all right. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. The basic layer of our language, the Anglo-Saxon layer. Thank you for being with me. I really do appreciate it. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or email me. My Linktree link is in my bio, and I'm happy to go live. I love teaching live. I love interacting. Jimmy, I really appreciate you being in here. You're the only one talking to me. I think I'm posting live on YouTube as well because I'm trying to also get used to that. But I do appreciate you being here and being interested in words. And I'll be doing this again. So thank you all for being here. And hopefully I will figure out how to end the live. I don't even know how to end it. I'll pause it. Let's see. I honestly do not even know how to end this. But I'll go ahead and end YouTube. YouTube, thank you for being here. And I'll come back on live again for more information to deepen your knowledge of the English language.